John Carter grew up in a small town where opportunities were rare. His family struggled financially, but they always taught him the value of hard work. As a child, he watched his parents work long hours just to make ends meet. Their sacrifices shaped his mindset. He knew that if he wanted to change his life, he had to work harder than everyone else. From a young age, John dreamed of owning a business. He didn't want to depend on someone else for a paycheck. He wanted to build something of his own, but the road to success wasn't easy. In school, John was a bright student, but he often faced discrimination. Teachers doubted his abilities. Some classmates looked down on him. He learned early that the world wasn't fair, but he refused to let that stop him. After high school, John worked multiple jobs while taking business courses at night. He studied successful entrepreneurs, learning everything he could. While others partied or relaxed, he spent his time reading, planning, and saving money. Years passed, and John finally started his own small company. It wasn't much at first, but he believed in his vision. He put in the work, making sacrifices every day. One day, he realized it was time to take his business to the next level. He needed a loan to expand. He had a solid plan, a growing customer base, and proof that his company was profitable. With confidence, he dressed in his best suit and walked into the biggest bank in town. He was ready to present his idea. He believed this was the moment his life would change, but he never expected what would happen next. John stepped into the bank with confidence. The polished floors reflected the bright overhead lights, and the air smelled of expensive cologne and fresh paper. He adjusted his tie and walked toward the front desk. A young receptionist looked up. She scanned him from head to toe, her expression unreadable. "Good morning," John said with a polite smile. "I have an appointment with the loan officer." She hesitated, then pointed to the waiting area. "Take a seat. Someone will call you shortly." John nodded and sat down. Around him, men in expensive suits discussed business deals. Some glanced at him but quickly looked away. He could feel the weight of their judgment. Minutes later, a man in his 50s walked up. He wore a navy suit and had a silver name tag that read Mr. Reynolds, Senior Loan Officer. He barely glanced at John as he called his name. John followed him into a glass-walled office and sat across from him. He handed over a neatly prepared business plan, complete with financial projections and growth strategies. "I'd like to apply for a loan," John said, keeping his voice steady. Mr. Reynolds skimmed through the first few pages, then leaned back in his chair. He smirked. "You're asking for quite a bit of money," he said. "And you run what kind of business again?" John explained his company's success, the profits he had made, and the potential for growth. But Mr. Reynolds didn't seem impressed. Instead, he chuckled and shook his head. "Listen," he said, "we don't usually give out loans like this to businesses like yours." John's stomach tightened. "Businesses like mine?" "Small businesses run by, well, let's just say, first-time entrepreneurs without significant assets." John understood what he meant. He had heard these words before, just in different ways. He sat up straight. "I have the numbers to back this up. My business is profitable. I've done my research. I know I can scale it with this loan." Mr. Reynolds smirked again. He glanced at the papers, then pushed them aside. "This isn't a good fit for us," he said. "But good luck." A few employees at nearby desks chuckled. One whispered something to another, and they both laughed. John's jaw tightened. He gathered his papers, stood up, and forced himself to remain calm. As he walked out of the bank, their laughter echoed behind him. But what they didn't know was that John had no plans of giving up. In fact, their rejection only made him more determined. John stepped outside, gripping his business plan. The cold air hit his face, but it wasn't the weather that made his body tense. It was the humiliation, the way they laughed, the way they dismissed him. He had expected questions, maybe even skepticism, but outright disrespect, that stung. He took a deep breath and forced himself to stay calm. This wasn't the first time someone doubted him. It wouldn't be the last. As he walked to his car, their words played in his mind. "We don't usually give out loans like this. Businesses like yours. Good luck." They didn't even bother to consider his plan. They saw him, made assumptions, and dismissed him before giving him a real chance. John sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel. He could feel the anger rising. He had worked too hard for this. He knew he deserved that loan. But then, a thought crossed his mind. I don't need them. The rejection wasn't a loss. It was a lesson. A reminder. No one was going to hand him success. He had to take it. John straightened up and pulled out his phone. If the bank wouldn't believe in him, he would find people who did. He started calling potential investors, pitching his business, showing them the same numbers he had shown the bank. One by one, he reached out to contacts, old colleagues and business mentors. Some said no, others listened. A few saw what the bank refused to see: his vision, his determination, and the potential of his business. Days turned into weeks. John barely slept, working harder than ever. He used every resource, every connection, and every bit of knowledge he had. And then, something happened. Through persistence and smart networking, he secured a private investment, more than what the bank had denied him. More than enough to take his business to the next level. The bank had laughed at him. But now, John had something far more valuable than their approval. He had a plan, a bigger one. And soon, the same people who laughed would have no choice but to take him seriously. John wasted no time. With the investment secured, he poured everything into growing his business. He expanded his operations, hired skilled employees, and improved his products and services. Every day started early and ended late. He managed deals, built relationships with suppliers, and streamlined his company's processes. He wasn't just working hard, he was working smart. His company specialized in providing financial consulting and small business solutions, helping other entrepreneurs succeed. He knew how tough it was for people like him to get funding, so he focused on offering services that banks ignored. Within months, the results spoke for themselves. His revenue tripled. More clients came in through referrals. Word spread that John Carter's business was making a real impact. But John didn't stop there. He reinvested every dollar wisely. He bought better technology, expanded his team, and entered new markets. He wasn't just running a business, he was building an empire. Despite the rapid growth, he never forgot the rejection at the bank. It fueled him. One evening, after finalizing another successful deal, John sat back in his office and reflected. He thought about how the bank employees had dismissed him. He pulled up a financial report on his computer. His company was now worth more than the bank that once laughed at him. A thought crossed his mind. What if I don't just succeed? What if I take over? He started researching. He learned that the bank was struggling. Their outdated policies and lack of innovation were hurting their profits. They had been losing customers to modern financial services, the same way they had ignored him. John saw an opportunity. He met with his team and laid out his next move. He wasn't just going to compete with the bank, he was going to own it. For weeks, he worked behind the scenes. He connected with investors, studied the bank's weaknesses, and formulated a takeover plan. He was patient, strategic, and methodical. And then the perfect moment arrived. The bank's stock price dropped. The board of directors started looking for a solution. They needed an investor, someone with the financial power to turn things around. John was ready. The same bank that had refused to believe in him now needed help. And he was about to give them an offer they couldn't ignore. John didn't rush. He knew that success wasn't just about having money, it was about making the right moves at the right time. He spent weeks researching the bank's financial situation. He looked at their profit margins, loan approval rates, and customer retention numbers. The deeper he dug, the clearer it became. This bank was in trouble. Their outdated policies were driving customers away. Competitors were offering better digital banking services. Small business owners, like John once was, were turning to alternative lenders. And the most important fact, the bank needed capital. Urgently. John had exactly what they needed. But he wasn't just going to invest, he was going to take control. First, he built a team of financial and legal experts. He brought in seasoned investors who believed in his vision. Together, they crafted a strategic acquisition plan. Next, he made discreet moves. He started buying small shares of the bank through different investment firms. Nothing too obvious, just enough to get a foothold. At the same time, he arranged meetings with key stakeholders, bank executives, board members, and major shareholders. He let them know he was interested in helping the bank recover. Some were skeptical, others were desperate. They had no idea who he was. But then, he presented his numbers. John showed them how his company had grown. He demonstrated his knowledge of financial services, proving he understood the problems the bank faced. He didn't just talk, he backed everything up with data. Slowly, the conversations shifted. The same people who once ignored him were now listening. And then came the final move, the official offer. John and his investors made a buyout proposal. It was aggressive, but fair. The bank's leadership had two choices: accept his offer and bring in new leadership, or continue struggling until they collapsed. The board members hesitated, some resisted, but the reality was clear: the bank was failing. They needed fresh ideas and strong financial backing. John provided both. After weeks of negotiations, the decision was made: the bank would be sold. John Carter, the same man who had once walked into that building seeking a loan, was now the one signing the acquisition papers. The deal was finalized, the contracts were signed. And just like that, he went from being rejected by the bank to owning it. John Carter stepped out of his black luxury car, the same bank towering in front of him. But this time, he wasn't a hopeful entrepreneur seeking approval. He was the new owner. Dressed in a tailored suit, he walked through the front doors with quiet confidence. The same polished floors, the same scent of fresh paper, the same employees. But now, everything felt different. The receptionist, the same young woman who once barely acknowledged him, straightened in her seat. Her eyes widened as she recognized him. He gave her a polite nod and continued walking. Every step felt surreal. The last time he had been here, they had laughed at him, dismissed him, rejected him. Now the laughter was gone. As he made his way through the building, employees whispered. Some looked confused, others nervous. He finally reached the conference room, where the bank's leadership sat waiting. The same people who had once ignored his business plan were now sitting at the table, looking at him with uncertainty. Mr. Reynolds, the senior loan officer, was among them. His face had lost its usual smirk. John took a seat at the head of the table. The room was silent. All eyes were on him. He set his briefcase down, opened it and pulled out a neatly stacked folder. As you all know, he began, his voice calm and steady, I am now the majority owner of this bank. Nobody spoke. He continued, things will be changing. Our approach to business will be different. We will no longer dismiss hardworking entrepreneurs based on assumptions. We will give opportunities to those who deserve them. His words hung in the air. Some of the executives shifted in their seats. He turned to Mr. Reynolds. I remember sitting in your office presenting my business plan. Mr. Reynolds swallowed hard but said nothing. John didn't need to say more. The message was clear. But he wasn't here for revenge, he was here to lead. This bank has the potential to grow, but only if we change how we operate, John said, leaning forward. I believe in second chances. But I also believe in accountability. Some executives nodded. Others stayed silent. Unsure of what this meant for them, John glanced around the table. For those willing to embrace change, you'll be part of something great. For those who refuse, well, he paused, letting the weight of his words settle. You know how the business world works. The meeting ended. As John stood to leave, Mr. Reynolds finally spoke. His voice was softer now. Mr. Carter, he said. I didn't realize back then. His voice trailed off. John gave a small smile. I know, he said simply. Then, with the same confidence he had walked in with, he left the room. This time, there was no laughter behind him. Only silence. John wasted no time in making changes. He knew the bank had been operating on outdated policies, shutting out hardworking people like himself. That was about to change. The first thing he did was introduce fair lending practices. No more biased decisions. No more dismissing small business owners just because they didn't fit the traditional mold. If someone had a solid business plan and the numbers to back it up, they would get a fair chance. He also modernized the bank's technology. He introduced online banking services, making it easier for customers to manage their money. He hired experts to develop financial education programs, helping entrepreneurs understand how to grow their businesses. Word spread quickly. Customers who once felt ignored started returning. New clients, eager for better service, chose John's bank over others. Inside the bank, the atmosphere changed too. Employees who had once laughed at him now showed him respect. Some were let go, while others adapted to the new culture of fairness and professionalism. John had turned rejection into power. He had taken what was once an obstacle and transformed it into an opportunity. The bank that once dismissed him was now thriving, because of him.